I'm just going to talk a little bit about the fact that, it's that wonderful season again, that holiday, beautiful season, which we like to call election time. Um, a time of fear-mongering and xenophobia and just all around hatred of the other. It's a beautiful, beautiful time in America.
There is a great hatred toward Americans by large segments of the Muslim population. Where the hatred comes from and why, we will have to determine. We're going to have to figure it out. We have to figure it out. We can't live like this. It's going to get worse and worse. You're going to have more World Trade Centers. It's going to get worse and worse, folks. We can be politically correct and we can be stupid, but it's going to get worse and worse. Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice.
It's really easy to make fun of Donald Trump, and it's very easy to make fun of Ben Carson for this outrageous rhetoric, except that they are simply reflecting a mood that already exists, not just in the Republican Party, but in the United States in general. 40% of Republicans actually want a national registry of Muslims in the United States. Now that sounds outrageously high, except that 30% of all Americans would like Muslims to, at the very least, carry special IDs that identify them as Muslims. 30% is more than 100 million Americans who believe in a special ID for Muslims. 65% of Republicans agree with Donald Trump that there should be a ban of Muslims coming into the United States. 57% of Republicans believe that that a Muslim should be banned from running for president. And then, of course, 43% of Republicans still believe that President Obama is a Muslim. It's unbelievable. There's nothing that this man can do.
Statements have done, though, has engendered fear in a lot of Muslims who are not born in America, obviously, because they feel that by him being the president, that he might carry out some of these things, or even worse than that, they fear legitimately that he can cause a climate that might cause people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. And the proof of that is that the Southern Poverty Law Center has described almost 1,000 incidents of hate and harassment against Muslims across the country since Mr. Trump's election.
I was a little surprised about how many people had negative feelings about our Muslim brothers and sisters and how little they knew about their faith that contributed to those negative feelings.
And this is the paradox. Many people in Europe and North America harbor strong feelings about Islam. It's generally not a neutral topic, as the security presence at my lecture 6 years ago reminds me. People have strong feelings about Islam. But the paradox is that many in the West know very little about Islam. Strong feelings about it, don't know much about what we have strong feelings about. According to a Gallup poll from 2010, 63% of Americans admit that they have little to no knowledge of Islam. About 2/3 of Americans admit it. My hunch is that the percentage is even higher of people who don't know much about Islam, but some people just don't realize they don't know much about it. So 2/3 of Americans will say that they don't know much about it. And according to a Huffington Post YouGov poll from last year, from 2015, 55% of Americans admit to having unfavorable views of Islam. So 2/3 of Americans say, don't know much about it. And a majority of Americans say, even though I don't know much about it, I still don't like it. study after study after study draws the same conclusion about media framing, media coverage of Islam, that the stories that the media tends to gravitate towards overwhelmingly are about violence and terrorism, as if that's the only thing worth talking about, worth narrating in the Muslim majority world or the Muslim population globally speaking. What we don't get from these media stories, of course, is any nuance or any real glimpse into the lived religion and the lived experiences and realities of 1.6 billion people. So that's part of the problem. It's the main problem. I know as a professor, most of my students coming in my classes, they know hardly anything about Islam except what they have seen on television, which in their case, growing up in the United States and post 9/11 America, has been story after story about terrorism. That's all they know. It's almost all that the media has given them, largely speaking.
ISIS is a group of people who are killers and murderers who use religion to shield their dirty religion. And it's as clear as that. And I see there's a cottage industry of people who try to blame the actual religion of Islam for the actions of people who are outside the norms of civilization. You can't any more than you can blame Christianity for Jim Jones. Jim Jones, who professed to be a Christian preacher, took people to Guyana and had them drink poison and killed about 800 or 900 people. But you can't blame the religion of Christianity for Jim Jones, who professed to be a Christian preacher, any more than you can blame Christianity for slavery in the United States. The institution of slavery existed in the United States for over 300 years, and people used the Bible to justify the status of African Americans, to justify the institution of slavery. Said that you should be loyal to your master, which is a misinterpretation of Scripture. The same as ISIS has a misinterpretation of Quran to justify heinous acts.
We can't get caught up in the negative rhetoric or even the anti-Islamic rhetoric and remind people that there's radical Christians out there. And as I said that night, there's radical Christians out there. We call them the KKK. And so Christianity, it does not, it cannot exclude itself from radicalism.
Now, obviously, the reason that there is such resonance for this kind of rhetoric is it's clear, it's obvious. I mean, there's been sort of an enormous amount of fear of groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and domestic terrorism, certainly in the wake of the Paris attacks and San Bernardino attacks. As a matter of fact, 49% of Americans, so nearly half of us, are afraid, say that they are afraid of being a victim of terrorism, 49%, which is kind of a remarkable figure because you are more likely to be struck by lightning twice than to be a victim of terrorism. In fact, you are more likely to be shot by a toddler in the United States. You are more likely to be shot by a toddler in the United States than you are to be a victim of terrorism. You have a better chance of dying because of your faulty furniture. Your faulty furniture is more deadly than a terrorist to Americans. And yet, half of us have as a primary fear this fear of being a victim of terrorism.
If a person adheres to the tenets of Islam, he or she will be a good neighbor, a good family person, a good citizen, a person who will relate to peoples of all nationalities, religions, persuasions. If you follow the principles of Islam, which is belief in God, a belief in prayer, charity, fasting in the month of Ramadan and Hajj once in a lifetime. Those basic principles will be something that people can relate to, no matter what their religion, because they're basic universal principles.
I'm not an expert in it, but I can't, in the readings that I've done, understand the difference between the creator gods of Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And so that's the perspective that I try to teach. It also comes to me from my own theology, where Jesus is very clear that we're to love God, love one another, and love ourselves. And I think that has to be our approach to life and understanding other people around the world, including our Islamic brothers and sisters.
In a nutshell, Islamophobia is an irrational fear, hostility, or hatred of Muslims and Islam. Islamophobia is also the discriminatory actions and exclusionary practices resulting from that. So it operates on two levels. It's fear, hostility, hatred, what we feel, what we might feel about Muslims, and to the extent we might even also act upon those feelings, either as individuals or as a community, or even in a systematic way with political structures and systems and laws and that sort of thing. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about Islamophobia. And there's lots of literature on, where this concept came from, what are the building blocks of Islamophobia. For most scholars, they would simply settle on the foundation of Islamophobia as the perception that Islam is backwards, it's uncivilized, it's irrational, it's manipulative. And the real foundation, in my opinion, is the notion that Islam is monolithic, which actually doesn't sound quite as bad as those other things I just said. But in my opinion, it's the most dangerous assumption, this idea that Islam is this monolithic tradition. It gets flattened. All Muslims are the same. If you've met one Muslim, you've met them all. But if the only Muslim I've ever met is the one I see on television, and his name is Osama bin Laden, and he becomes the stand-in for all Muslims, now you can see how dangerous that assumption is. If all Islam is the same, but that's all I know about Islam. So those are the building blocks of Islamophobia.
If you are a person of faith, as I am, as many of you are, then you have to recognize a fundamental truth, which is that the only answer to religious violence is religious peace. The only answer to religious hatred is religious love. The only answer to religious misogyny is religious feminism. The only answer to religious chauvinism is religious pluralism. That it is only we ourselves, those of us who are people of faith, who can fight back against those extreme, radical interpretations of our faith.
You should view people beyond the context of a label. And you should view people based on what they do, how they conduct themselves, how they treat you, how they treat people in their orbit. And if you do that, I think you'll get a better understanding of people. The commonalities that people have, I think, outweigh all of the differences. Obviously, people have different religions, different cultural ethos, different languages, different dress, but the basic commonality of human beings, I think if you judge people on that and look at people on that, then I think a lot of the mystery of Islam is stripped away.
That's what we have to remind our brothers and sisters who have this fear, that we're more similar than we are different.
Nearly half of Americans right now have a negative view of Islam. That's the highest that number has been since the immediate aftermath of 2001. And yet, what's really fascinating is that poll after poll has shown that if you know a single Muslim, if you know one Muslim, I don't mean, your best friend is a Muslim. I mean, just like your neighbor or the grocer. If you know a single Muslim, it cuts in half your negativity rating. Why? Obvious. Because if you know a person as a person, instead of as a symbol, then it becomes very hard to otherize that person. It becomes very hard to think of them as simply, a symbol of other.
The truth is, there simply are not enough strong relationships in the West between Muslims who are in the minority and the non-Muslim majority. This is true in Europe, it's true in Canada, and it's true in the United States. But personal relationships matter. They break down barriers, they erode prejudices, and they introduce a human face into the equation. That's often what is lacking in our conversations and debates about Islam in the 21st century. There's very little humanity that's inserted into this. Muslims are oftentimes abstractions, and it's easy for them to remain abstractions because there are not enough real relationships that have been built.
I got acquainted with a Muslim woman back, it's been a while now. I would have to say maybe 96, 97, and she and I were on the Camden County March of Dimes board. But what I loved about it, if you get past all those just surface kind of things, is that we were both worried about the same things. Our children were the same ages. We were both working moms, both married, both running around trying to figure out how to get dinner on the table so homework got done. And so I found that we had everything in common except the way we dressed. And in fact, also found out that some of the basic tenets of our faith practice were the same. Prayers and worship and the reading of scripture. And how do we teach our children those basic things of our faith so that they grew up? There was no difference. I mean, obviously she was Islamic and I was Christian, but the things that were important and priorities for us were the very same things. And what a life lesson that was early on, which is probably why I've been more open and have a heart for my sisters and brothers of that faith.
And a lot of Christians weren't familiar with the fact that the Quran has a lot of similar history, similar characters, the same characters in many cases in their sacred scriptures as Jews and Christians had in theirs.
It is the one God, the same God that we honor and worship and praise in Christianity, is the God that Muhammad encountered during his spiritual growth. And so I think that's encouraging as far as uniting the people of God around the world.
Why should we care? Why should we care collectively, no matter what our faith background is? Well, there are two reasons I want to conclude with tonight about why we should care, why this matters. The first reason we should care is because human dignity is at stake. And I know it sounds melodramatic when I say it, but I hope you now understand human lives are at stake and livelihoods are at stake. People's lives are adversely affected by Islamophobia. People die because of Islamophobia. So doing nothing about Islamophobia or feeling that it's not really our problem if we're not Muslim means that we're a part of the problem. Doing nothing always means we're doing something, right? Doing nothing means we have chosen a side. The side of the status quo, the side of bigotry, the side of injustice, the side of hatred. And we need to think carefully about which side we want to be on, now more than ever.
So my sort of call to all of us is that we recognize that the values that we hold as people of faith are values that have to be expressed in this world, now more than ever. That we have to be bold and loud with our values. That we have to make sure that the extremes don't speak for us, political extremes or religious extremes. And that the only way to do that is to raise our voices to the same pitch, to the same volume as the loud voices on the fringes.
I think that we need to keep the dialogue open, and I think that we need to, those of us who are pastors, those of us who care about this, need to continue to educate ourselves and to learn. So when someone says something that's not true about the Quran or Muhammad, that we don't have to stumble around. We can answer them right away with, well, the Quran says, and we find Jesus saying that, and thus and such in the scriptures.
In thinking this point, I'm often reminded of this famous quote. Some of you are familiar with it, others of you may not be, but it's a quote by a Lutheran theologian and minister, Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, for I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Not speaking up to challenge bigotry, it always has consequences. Niemöller could tell you that. What he also discovered is it will not do to stand up for your own. Our destinies as human beings are intertwined, our fates are bound together, and that was a truth that he did not realize until it was too late.
We had a rally right here in Atlantic City at the City Hall lobby because of a rally against Islamophobia. And we had a tremendous outpouring from Jewish groups, obviously from Muslim groups, but surprisingly from religious groups, Christian religious leaders right here in Atlantic City.
I'm just here because somebody's got to speak up and say, you know, you're valued, you're okay, you know, you're part of what's going on here. You know, this is why we do America, not right. You're not here in spite of it, you're because of it.
Right, no doubt.
So I don't know, there got to be some voices that of the majority. There
right.
actually is a majority that thinks that what's going on is wrong.
Yeah.
And so the majority needs to speak.
I'm with you. I think you know, the problem that we have right now is the same problem that we've had in society for quite some time, and that's that, you know, what's worse than the injustice is the people who are quiet during those times. And you see a lot of people, they maybe are doing stupid things, saying stupid things and harassing people, and that isn't the problem so much as the people who stand by and just watch or videotape it with their phone because they actually normalize that activity, right? And those are the times where we got to kind of stand up and speak out and be like, look, that sort of stuff's not tolerated.
Here's the other thing. There's not much I can do between now and 4 years from now. There's
right.
just not much. This is one of the things I can do. I'm more likely to be struck by lightning standing here right now than to die of a terrorism attack in my lifetime. But we're all going to give up everything we love about this country and each other on account of that? No.
Yeah, you got
that's baloney.
You got a better chance of slipping in the bathtub.
Yeah, I know. You know? So, you know, but we all get imprisoned to the fear, then the evil wins.
Right, no doubt.
I'm here to help you not be afraid, man.
Jesus came to teach us how to love one another and to build relationships and how to be open with one another. And that Jesus didn't tell us we had to agree on every single thing, but that we had to give people an opportunity and see them through his eyes with open hearts and open minds.